She helped a strange elderly woman, and what happened next changed her life. After being fired and betrayed on the same day, she thought nothing could get worse. Hours later, she was taken to a mansion where nothing made sense. Not the looks, not the whispers. Inside, many memories began to surface, and when she uncovered the truth, she understood why that family had done everything to keep her away. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Continuing on. The morning began like any other. Eleanor Hayes adjusted her grey blazer for the third time in front of the company bathroom mirror, took a deep breath and practiced a smile that no longer fit her face. 12 years. 12 years dedicated to that corporation, building results, training teams, giving up weekends, birthdays, and even herself. And now there she was, summoned to an extraordinary meeting in the boardroom, with no prior notice, no explanation. The hallway had never seemed so long. With each step, she felt her colleagues' gazes shift away, as if they all already knew something she was still ignorant of. The glass doors opened with a mechanical hiss, and inside, 5 men in suits were waiting for her. No smiles, no greetings, just the icy silence of a sentence already decided. The dismissal came wrapped in technical terms: strategic restructuring, new directives, cost-cutting. Eleanor heard it all as if she were underwater, the voices muffled, distant. She tried to argue, to show mental spreadsheets of everything she had achieved, but was cut off with a wave of a hand. There was no room for defense. The decision was made. Collect your belongings, sign the documents, leave your ID badge at the reception. She left like a ghost. She crossed the office under pitying and indifferent stares. She gathered her things in a ridiculous cardboard box, too small to contain an entire life. 12 years fit in there, between a mug with her name on it and a framed photo from a time when she still believed that effort was enough. The city swallowed her as soon as she stepped onto the sidewalk. New York. City never stopped. Never. Horns, hurried footsteps, street vendors, the smell of coffee mixed with the diesel fumes of the buses. Eleanor walked through the streets of Midtown with no specific destination, just following the flow, trying not to break down right there in the middle of the crowd. She needed to get home. She needed Thomas. She needed someone to tell her that everything would be okay, that starting over was possible, that she was not a failure. But the home she found offered no comfort. Thomas was in the living room, sitting on the sofa, with an expression she knew well. The expression of someone who had already made a decision and was just waiting for the right moment to announce it. Eleanor barely had time to drop the box on the floor. "I need to talk to you." The sentence came out dry, rehearsed. He didn't wait for her to sit down. He didn't ask about her day. He simply started talking, as if reading from a script. It wasn't working anymore. They weren't working anymore. He needed space, time, freedom. She was too intense, too demanding, too complicated. Eleanor heard each word like a blade. She tried to understand, tried to ask, but he was already distant, as if this were all just a bureaucratic procedure. And then came the final blow. There was someone else, someone who understood him better, who made him feel light, someone who, in his words, didn't suffocate him. The humiliation burned more than the pain. Eleanor felt the floor disappear from under her feet. In a matter of hours, she had lost everything. The job that defined her identity, the relationship she believed was solid, the sense of belonging that kept her standing. Thomas already had his bags packed. She was the one who had to leave. The house was his, after all. It always had been. Eleanor gathered what she could with trembling hands. Clothes, documents, objects that suddenly seemed to have no meaning at all. She left carrying 2 heavy suitcases and an even greater emptiness in her chest. Night was already falling over New York when she found herself on the street again, without direction, without a plan, without anything but the certainty that she had hit rock bottom. She walked without thinking, just putting one foot in front of the other. The city lights blinked indifferently. Illuminated storefronts displaying lives that were not hers. Restaurants full of people laughing, toasting, seeming to belong somewhere. Eleanor felt invisible, as if she could disappear right there and no one would notice. That's when she heard the noise. A dull impact followed by screams. People started running towards a point further ahead. Eleanor saw the crowd form quickly, cell phones raised, agitated voices. Someone shouted to call an ambulance. Others just watched, filmed, commented. No one did anything. Something inside Eleanor stirred. Even shattered, even broken, she dropped her suitcases on the ground and ran. She pushed her way, through the onlookers, until she reached the center of the scene. An elderly woman was lying on the asphalt, her body still, her face pale. A car had fled after the hit and run. Eleanor knelt beside her, checked her breathing, held her hand. "Call an ambulance now," she ordered, with a firmness that surprised even herself. The people just stared, paralyzed by collective inertia. Eleanor took off her coat and placed it under the woman's head, spoke to her in a low voice, said she would stay there, that she wasn't alone, that help was on the way. The elderly woman's eyes fluttered open for a moment. There was fear there, but also something like gratitude. Eleanor held her hand tighter. "I don't know your name, but I'm going to stay with you until you're okay. I promise." The ambulance arrived after what felt like an eternity. The paramedics acted quickly, but allowed Eleanor to accompany them when she insisted she wouldn't leave the woman alone. At the hospital, while the doctors worked, Eleanor remained in the waiting room, still holding the elderly woman's purse, which she had picked up from the ground. The hours passed slowly. Eleanor didn't know why. She was there. She didn't know this woman. She had no obligation, but something kept her in that place, as if by saving someone, she was somehow saving herself. When a doctor finally appeared, his face tired but relieved, Eleanor knew the woman would survive. Fractures, bruises, but nothing irreversible. She was lucky, the doctor said, and she was lucky to have someone with her. Eleanor asked to see her. The doctor hesitated, but something in the eyes of this exhausted young woman with her wrinkled clothes and swollen eyes convinced him. "She can stay for a few minutes." The woman was awake, though fragile. When she saw Eleanor enter, her eyes filled with tears. Eleanor approached slowly, sat in the chair beside the bed. "You're okay now. You're going to recover." The elderly woman extended a trembling hand. Eleanor held it carefully. "You stayed with me," the woman whispered, her voice hoarse. "Why?" Eleanor felt a lump in her throat. "Because no one should be alone at a time like this." They sat in silence for a while. The woman didn't let go of her hand. "What's your name?" "Eleanor, Eleanor Hayes." Beatrice Montgomery, and I owe my life to you, Eleanor." Eleanor shook her head. "I just did what anyone should do. But no one did. Only you." There was something in Beatrice's eyes that went beyond gratitude. It was recognition, as if she saw in Eleanor something familiar, something that resonated with her own loneliness. "Do you have somewhere to go tonight?" The question came out soft but direct. Eleanor hesitated. She couldn't lie. "No, not yet." Beatrice squeezed her hand. "Then come with me. When they discharge me, come to my house. It's the least I can do." Eleanor tried to refuse, but Beatrice was insistent. It wasn't charity, she explained. It was necessity. The house was too big, too empty. And she needed company, someone who wouldn't treat her like a fragile relic. Eleanor, too exhausted to resist, finally accepted. 2 days later, when Beatrice was discharged, a driver picked them up in a car Eleanor had only seen in magazines. The drive was long, crossing the city until they reached one of New York's most exclusive neighborhoods. The iron gate opened to reveal an immense property, surrounded by impeccable gardens and a mansion that seemed to be from another era. Eleanor got out of the car almost in disbelief. This couldn't be real. The house was monumental, with marble columns, huge windows, and an architecture that mixed classic elegance with modern touches. But despite all the grandeur, there was something oppressive in the air. A heavy silence, as if the house breathed sadness. "Welcome, Eleanor," Beatrice said, leaning on her cane. "I know it might seem like a lot, but I promise you'll get used to it." Eleanor entered slowly, her eyes scanning the immense hall, the crystal chandelier, the majestic staircase. Everything was too perfect, too organized, too cold. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a museum. A housekeeper appeared to help Beatrice. Eleanor was led to the second floor, to a room that was larger than the entire apartment she had shared with Thomas. A huge bed, silk curtains, a private bathroom that looked more like a spa. It was all beautiful, but Eleanor felt out of place, like an intruder in a world that wasn't hers. "Rest, my dear. We'll talk more tomorrow," Beatrice said before retiring. Eleanor closed the door and finally allowed herself to break down. She sat on the edge of the bed and cried. She cried for the dismissal, for the betrayal, for the life that had crumbled. But she also cried with relief, because that night, at least, she had a roof over her head. Morning came with the sun streaming through the huge windows. Eleanor woke up disoriented, taking a few seconds to remember where she was. She went down the stairs slowly, following the smell of coffee. She found Beatrice on the veranda, having breakfast alone, looking at the garden with a distant expression. "Good morning," Eleanor said, still uncertain. Beatrice smiled, and for the first time Eleanor saw a genuine sparkle in those tired eyes. "Good morning, my dear. Please sit. Let's talk." During breakfast, Beatrice shared fragments of her story, a widow for 15 years, mother of 2, grandmother to none, because her children never gave her grandchildren, a life built around a family fortune, but empty of true affection. The children only appeared on specific dates, always in a hurry, always with urgent matters to discuss. "And you, Eleanor? What's your story?" Eleanor hesitated, but something in Beatrice's presence made her open up. She told her about the firing, about Thomas, about the feeling of having lost, everything in a matter of hours. Beatrice listened in silence, just nodding from time to time. When Eleanor finished, Beatrice reached across the table and touched her hand. "Then we are 2 lost souls who found each other at the right moment." Eleanor felt her eyes sting. She didn't know why those words touched her so much, but they did. "Stay as long as you need, Eleanor. Not as a guest, but as part of this house. It needs life. And I need someone who sees me as a person, not a walking vault." Eleanor laughed, though her eyes were still teary. "Thank you, Mrs. Montgomery. I don't know how to thank you. Just stay, that's enough." The following days were about adapting. Eleanor explored the house, met the staff, helped Beatrice with small tasks. The routine brought a strange sense of purpose. She didn't know what she would do with her life from then on, but at least she had a place to start over. It was on a Thursday afternoon that Edward Montgomery appeared. Eleanor was in the library, leafing through an old book when she heard the front door open with force. Heavy footsteps echoed through the hall. A male voice, deep and authoritarian, called for his mother. Beatrice stood up, her face tense. "My son," she murmured to Eleanor. "He doesn't usually show up unannounced." Edward entered the room like a storm. Tall, perfectly coiffed grey hair, an impeccable Italian suit. He had the posture of someone accustomed to being obeyed. His eyes swept the room until they landed on Eleanor. His expression changed instantly. "Who are you?" Eleanor stood up, trying to look confident. "Eleanor Hayes. Your mother offered me a place to stay." Edward looked from Eleanor to Beatrice, his jaw tight. "Can we speak in private, Mother?" Beatrice lifted her chin. "What you have to say can be said in front of Eleanor. She's part of this house now." Edward took a deep breath, clearly controlling his irritation. "Fine. Then explain to me why there's a stranger living here." "She is not a stranger. She saved my life." Edward let out a short, humorless laugh. "How convenient. And now she's living here, I presume, using your resources, taking advantage of your generosity." Eleanor felt anger rise. "I'm not taking advantage of anything. Your mother offered me help at a difficult time. As soon as I get back on my feet, I'll leave." Edward stared at her, his eyes cold. "Of course you will, but until then I'll make sure everything is above board. My mother may be generous, but I am not naive." "Edward, that's disrespectful," Beatrice intervened, her voice firm. "Disrespectful is letting a stranger into your life without any background check. But don't worry, Mother. I'll take care of it." He left the same way he arrived, leaving a trail of tension in the air. Eleanor was trembling. Beatrice approached and touched her shoulder. "Don't mind him. Edward has always been suspicious, but he'll get used to it." Eleanor wasn't so sure. Edward's look as he left wasn't just suspicion, it was a threat. And she knew, deep down, that the fragile peace she had found was about to be tested. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. Lying in the enormous bed staring at the ceiling, she felt that something was about to change, that this temporary refuge hid layers of conflict she didn't yet understand, and that, without knowing it, she had walked into a story much bigger than she imagined. The house, so silent, seemed to hold secrets in every room, and Eleanor, without understanding why, felt that she was somehow connected to all of them, as if that meeting with Beatrice hadn't been just a coincidence, but the beginning of a journey that would change her life forever. And as the city outside continued its frantic dance, indifferent to the drama unfolding between those marble walls, Eleanor closed her eyes and tried to believe that, even in the midst of chaos, something good could still be born. That even shattered, she still had the strength to start over. That this fall, as painful as it was, might just be the prelude to a new beginning she didn't even know she needed. The following weeks brought a routine Eleanor never imagined living. She would wake up early, have coffee with Beatrice on the veranda, talk about everything and nothing, and gradually that monumental house began to feel less hostile. The initial coldness gave way to small moments of human warmth, shy laughter, shared stories. Beatrice revealed herself to be a woman of deep layers, someone who had built empires but had never managed to build true bridges with the people she loved. Eleanor, in turn, was slowly finding herself. She woke up without the weight of rejection crushing her chest. She started helping Beatrice with small tasks, organizing correspondence, accompanying her to doctor's appointments, reading to her at night when sleep was elusive. It was a silent but deep partnership. Two women wounded by life finding refuge in each other. But not all was peaceful. Edward would appear unannounced, always with that look of suspicion etched on his face. He would ask indirect questions, make pointed comments, and watch Eleanor as if waiting for her to make a mistake. And Eleanor, as much as she tried to ignore it, felt the weight of that judgmental gaze in every move she made. It was during one of these unexpected visits that Edward brought someone with him. Eleanor was helping Beatrice choose flowers in the garden when she heard voices coming from the living room. She recognized Edward's voice, but there was another, deeper, more calculated one. "Mother, I need you to meet someone," Edward called from the veranda. Beatrice sighed. "He always needs me to meet someone," she murmured to Eleanor, but headed towards the house. Eleanor followed, keeping a respectful distance. In the living room, a middle-aged man was waiting for them. Impeccable grey suit, leather briefcase, gold-rimmed glasses. He had the posture of someone used to solving problems, but his smile was calculated, too rehearsed to be genuine. "Dr. Roger Finch," he introduced himself, extending his hand to Beatrice with an exaggerated bow. "It's an honor to finally meet you in person, Mrs. Montgomery. Edward has spoken so highly of you." Beatrice shook his hand briefly. "I hope they were good things." "Only the best," he replied, and his eyes flicked quickly to Eleanor before returning to Beatrice. "Edward has hired me to assist with some of the family's legal matters, just to ensure everything is in order. Nothing for you to worry about." Eleanor felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something about that man that bothered her, a visceral sense of danger she couldn't explain. "Legal matters?" Beatrice frowned. "I'm not aware of any legal matters, Edward." Edward stepped closer, his voice soft but firm. "It's just a precaution, Mother. With your age and your assets, it's important to have everything documented, updated. Dr. Finch is the best in his field. He will ensure your interests are protected." "Protected from whom?" Beatrice's question was loaded with suspicion. "From any eventuality," Dr. Finch intervened, the smile never leaving his face. "The world is full of ill-intentioned people, Mrs. Montgomery, and a woman of your standing must always be vigilant." His gaze landed on Eleanor for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. Eleanor understood. She was the threat that needed to be neutralized. "If you'll excuse me," Eleanor said, her voice controlled, "I'll go make some tea." She left the room feeling the weight of two pairs of eyes on her back. In the kitchen, she tried to calm her racing heart. She knew Edward was up to something, but she hadn't imagined he would be so direct. While preparing the tea, she overheard fragments of the conversation. Edward talking about asset protection, Dr. Finch mentioning documents, will updates, powers of attorney. Beatrice remained silent, which was rare. Eleanor knew that silence. It was the silence of someone evaluating, processing, suspecting. When Eleanor returned with the tray, the conversation stopped abruptly. Edward took a cup with a curt thank you. Dr. Finch declined, citing urgent commitments. "It was a pleasure, Mrs. Montgomery. I'll be in touch soon," he said, already heading for the door. "And it was a pleasure to meet you too, Eleanor. I'm sure we'll see each other again." Eleanor just nodded. When he left, Edward lingered for a few more minutes, making small talk with his mother, but his eyes kept returning to Eleanor with that indecipherable expression. As soon as Edward left, Beatrice sank into her armchair, exhausted. Eleanor approached her. "Are you all right?" Beatrice closed her eyes. "Edward is too worried. He always has been. But I think this time he's overreacting. He's trying to push me away," Eleanor said bluntly. Beatrice opened her eyes and looked at Eleanor with an intensity that surprised her. "I know. And that's exactly why you're going to stay. I will not allow anyone to tell me who I can and cannot associate with in my own home." Eleanor felt a mix of relief and concern. She didn't want to be the cause of family conflict, but she also had nowhere else to go, and strangely she didn't want to leave. There was something about this house, about this relationship with Beatrice, that held her there. A sense of belonging she hadn't felt in a long time. The days that followed were filled with growing tension. Edward began to appear more frequently, always accompanied by Dr. Finch. The conversations were always about financial, legal, and estate matters. Beatrice participated, but Eleanor could see the older woman's growing discomfort. Eleanor tried to remain invisible during these visits, but Dr. Finch always found a way to involve her. Seemingly innocent questions about her past, her family, her previous job. Eleanor answered cautiously, but she felt that every word was being stored, catalogued, and prepared to be used against her. It was Cecilia, Beatrice's daughter, who brought a brief respite. She appeared one Saturday. Afternoon unannounced, and unlike her brother, her presence was light, welcoming. Cecilia was a woman in her 40s, elegant but without Edward's haughty air, with kind eyes that truly saw people. "So you're the famous Eleanor," she said, extending her hand with a genuine smile. "My mother won't stop talking about you. I think you've worked a miracle here." Eleanor shook her hand, surprised by the warm reception. "I just try to help where I can." "And you're doing a wonderful job. I haven't seen my mother this lively in years. Edward may not see it, but I do." They talked for hours. Cecilia told her about her life, a marriage that had ended years ago, 2 grown children living abroad, an art gallery she managed. There was a quiet sadness about her, the same loneliness Eleanor recognized in Beatrice. "Edward is being an idiot, isn't he?" Cecilia asked suddenly, without beating around the bush. Eleanor hesitated, but Beatrice answered for her. "He's being his usual self, suspicious, controlling, incapable of believing that people can do good without ulterior motives." Cecilia sighed. "I'll talk to him. But you know how he is, Mother. Ever since Dad passed away, he thinks he's the guardian of everything, as if we needed protection." "We need family," Beatrice corrected, her voice firm, "not guardians." It was at that moment that Eleanor felt, for the first time, that she might have allies in that house, that maybe she wasn't as alone as she thought. But the peace was short-lived. The following week, Eleanor started noticing strange things. Her belongings moved. Drawers she was sure she had closed were found open, personal documents that seemed to have been tampered with. At first she thought she was being paranoid, but the feeling of being watched grew with each passing day. It was one morning that everything was confirmed. Eleanor went down early to get water from the kitchen and saw one of the housekeepers hurriedly leaving her room. When questioned, the woman stammered an excuse about sheets, but her guilty look gave everything away. Eleanor ran upstairs and found her room subtly but unmistakably disturbed. Someone had been looking for something, and she knew exactly who was behind it. She confronted Beatrice immediately. The older woman turned pale with anger. She called the housekeeper, who confessed through tears that Dr. Finch had offered her money to go through Eleanor's belongings. He was looking for something compromising, anything that could be used against her. Beatrice fired the housekeeper on the spot and called Edward, her voice trembling with fury. Eleanor had never seen her so upset. The conversation was brief but intense. Edward tried to justify himself, saying it was just a precaution, that he needed to protect the family. Beatrice hung up on him. "This is over, Eleanor. I will not allow them to treat you like this in my house." But Eleanor knew it wasn't over. It had just begun. Dr. Finch was patient, calculating. If he couldn't find anything by investigating her past, he would create something. And Edward, driven by the fear of losing control of the family fortune, would allow it. It was in this tense atmosphere that Isabel entered the story. Eleanor met her one afternoon when she decided to leave the mansion for a breath of fresh air. She needed air, normal people, a reminder that there was a world beyond those marble walls. She went into a cafe downtown, ordered a cappuccino, and sat in a corner. That's when a woman with short hair and sharp eyes sat at the table next to her. She was typing furiously on her laptop, papers scattered, a pen in her mouth. The woman looked up, noticed Eleanor watching, and smiled. "Tough day?" Eleanor smiled back. "You could say that." "Me too. I'm investigating a corporate fraud case, and people lie with such impressive ease." "Isabel Thorne," she introduced herself, extending her hand. "Investigative journalist." "Eleanor Hayes." They started talking, and to Eleanor's surprise, the words flowed naturally. Isabel had a gift for making people feel at ease, for truly listening, and Eleanor, who had been bottling everything up for weeks, began to vent. She told her about the firing, about Thomas, about the accident with Beatrice, about the mansion, about Edward and the sinister Dr. Finch. Isabel listened attentively, asking pointed questions, her eyes sharp. When Eleanor finished, Isabel was silent for a moment. Then she leaned back in her chair. "You realize this whole story sounds way too suspicious, don't you?" Eleanor frowned. "What do you mean?" Isabel leaned forward. "A wealthy woman takes you in. Her son is suspicious. Hires a lawyer to investigate you. They dig through your life. That's not just a precaution. That's fear. And people with a lot to lose are only afraid when they feel something is threatening their status quo." Eleanor processed the words. "But I'm no threat. I don't want anything from her." "It's not about what you want. It's about what they think you might want, or what your presence represents." Eleanor felt a chill down her spine. "What do you suggest?" Isabel took out a business card and handed it to her. "That you let me do some digging, discreetly. I have sources, access to databases. If this lawyer is fabricating something against you, I can find out before it's too late." Eleanor held the card, undecided. "Why would you do that?" Isabel smiled. "Because I hate injustice, and because your story intrigues me. Besides, women need to help each other, especially when men in suits are plotting to destroy them." Eleanor put the card in her pocket. "Thank you. Even if nothing comes of it, thank you for listening." "Something will come of it," Isabel said confidently. "Stories like yours are never simple. There are always layers, and I love discovering what's hidden between the lines." Eleanor returned to the mansion feeling for the first time in weeks not so alone. She had an ally now, someone from outside that suffocating world, someone with nothing to lose or gain, who just wanted the truth. That night at dinner, Beatrice noticed the change in Eleanor's demeanor. "You're different today. Lighter." Eleanor smiled. "I made a friend. It's been a long time since I made a real friend." Beatrice reached across the table and squeezed Eleanor's hand. "Friends are rare treasures, my dear, especially true ones. Cherish that friendship." Eleanor nodded, but didn't mention that Isabel was a journalist, or the investigation that was about to begin. She didn't want to worry Beatrice, any more than she already was. The following days were a tense wait. Eleanor followed her routine, cared for Beatrice, avoided Edward and Dr. Finch when they appeared. But her mind was always on alert, waiting for the next move. It was Isabel who called first. "I found something. Can we meet?" They met at the same cafe. Isabel was serious, her laptop open on the table. Eleanor sat down, her heart racing. "What did you find?" Isabel turned the laptop. On the screen were scanned documents, certificates, old records. I started by investigating Dr. Roger Finch. He's too clean. Eleanor, too clean. No one who works with wealthy families for that long has such a spotless record. So I dug deeper. And guess what I found? What? 3 sealed cases, all for misconduct, all settled out of court. Large sums of money changing hands. He's an expert at fabricating evidence, creating narratives, destroying reputations, and he's doing it to you. Eleanor's blood ran cold. How do you know? Isabel opened another file. Because I found drafts of documents on the server of a third-party office he uses. Fake documents, Eleanor, creating a non-existent criminal record for you. Debts you never had. Forged employment lawsuits, all to paint you as a professional con artist. Eleanor couldn't breathe. But why? Why go to all that trouble? Isabel closed the laptop and looked into Eleanor's eyes. That's the question that intrigues me. Normally, in cases like this, the goal is simple. Get rid of the person, protect the inheritance. But there's something more here. It's too personal, too calculated, as if it's not just about protecting the assets, but about hiding something bigger. Hiding what? Isabel took a deep breath. I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. In the meantime, you need to be careful. This man is dangerous, and Edward is either being manipulated or he's an accomplice. Either way, you're in the middle of something much bigger than you imagine. Eleanor returned home in shock. She tried to process it all, but it was too much. When she arrived, Beatrice was waiting for her in the living room, worried. Where were you? I was worried. Eleanor sat down next to her. Mrs. Montgomery, I need to tell you something. And she told her. About Isabel, about the investigation, about the fake documents. Beatrice listened in silence, her face growing paler and paler. When Eleanor finished, Beatrice was trembling. That miserable man, she whispered, her voice hoarse with anger. And Edward allowed this. My own son. Eleanor held her hands. I'll understand if you want me to leave. I don't want to be the cause of a fight in your family. Beatrice squeezed her hands with surprising strength. You're not going anywhere, Eleanor. This just got personal, and I don't let anyone destroy innocent people in my house. We will fight. Together. Eleanor felt her eyes sting. She had never had someone fight for her like that. Why do you believe in me so much? Beatrice smiled, a sad but genuine smile. Because I recognize goodness when I see it, and because you remind me of someone I lost a long time ago, someone I should have protected and didn't. Eleanor wanted to ask more, but Beatrice was already standing up. Tomorrow we go to my lawyer, the real one, and we are going to sort this out. That night, Eleanor lay in bed, knowing that the war had officially begun. Edward and Dr. Finch had no idea that she would have allies, that Beatrice would fight for her, that Isabel was uncovering every buried secret. And as the city outside slept, indifferent to the dramas unfolding in marble rooms and wounded hearts, Eleanor closed her eyes and tried to find strength for what was to come. Because she knew in the depths of her soul that the worst was yet to come, that the revelations awaiting her would change everything, and that nothing, absolutely nothing, would be as she imagined. The week leading up to the dinner was one of silent preparation. Beatrice met with her trusted lawyer, a discreet man who had worked for the family. For decades, Eleanor attended the meetings, listening to every detail, every strategy. The lawyer, Mr. Henry Sampson, was different from Roger Finch. There was honesty in his eyes, a genuine concern for Beatrice that went beyond a monthly retainer. The false documents Roger was fabricating were carefully analyzed. Mr. Sampson confirmed what Isabel had discovered. They were well-crafted forgeries, but forgeries nonetheless. With the evidence they had, they could not only expose Roger, but also sue him. But Beatrice had other plans. I want to confront them, at my table, on my territory. I want to see their faces when they find out I know everything. Mr. Sampson tried to dissuade her, arguing that a public confrontation would be risky, but Beatrice was determined. I've spent my whole life avoiding conflicts, being the patient and understanding matriarch, but that's over. Edward needs to learn that he cannot manipulate his own mother, and this Roger needs to learn that he cannot destroy innocent people without consequences. Eleanor watched it all with a mix of admiration and fear. She saw in Beatrice a strength she herself didn't know she possessed, but she also felt the weight of responsibility. This battle was for her, and that made her both deeply grateful and deeply guilty. The dinner was set for the following Friday. Beatrice insisted it be formal, with all family members present. Edward accepted, probably thinking it would be another meeting where he could exert his control. Cecilia confirmed her attendance, intrigued by her mother's insistence. And Roger, of course, would be invited as the new family advisor. Eleanor spent the days preparing herself emotionally. Isabel visited her several times, bringing more information, more pieces of the puzzle. They had discovered that Roger was linked to cases of estate fraud in other wealthy families. Always the same pattern: isolate the vulnerable person, create false dossiers against anyone who threatened the heirs, ensure the assets stayed exactly where they were supposed to. But there was something Isabel couldn't understand. Why was Edward so desperate? The fortune was vast enough to be divided generously among the heirs. Even if Beatrice left something for Eleanor, it wouldn't significantly impact his inheritance. There was something more there, something they couldn't yet see. It was Cecilia who unknowingly provided the first clue. She appeared at the mansion a few days before the dinner, saying she needed to talk to her mother about something important. Eleanor discreetly withdrew, but she overheard fragments of the conversation through the ajar door. "Mother, I need to tell you something about Edward." Cecilia's voice sounded tense. "He's in debt, a lot of debt. Bad investments, loans he can't repay. His company is on the verge of bankruptcy." Beatrice was silent for a long moment. "Why didn't he tell me?" "Because he's too proud. And because he was planning to use the inheritance to cover everything. He was counting on it, Mother. On your passing." The brutal frankness of the words echoed through the room. Eleanor felt a knot in her stomach. Now it all made sense. Edward wasn't protecting the inheritance, he was desperate for it, and Eleanor's presence, especially if Beatrice decided to include her in the will, threatened his plans for financial salvation. When Cecilia left, Beatrice called for Eleanor. "Did you hear?" Eleanor nodded, not trying to deny it. Beatrice sighed heavily. "My son is broken, and he didn't have the courage to tell me. He preferred to hire a criminal to push you away rather than ask me for help." Eleanor sat beside her. "Maybe he's ashamed. Maybe he thinks he's disappointed you. And he has. But not for his financial failures. We all fail. He disappointed me by choosing the path of dishonesty, by trying to destroy an innocent person to save himself." They sat in silence for a while. Finally, Beatrice spoke again. "The dinner is even more important now. It's not just about you, Eleanor. It's about my entire family. It's time to put the cards on the table." Friday arrived, heavy with tension. The table was set with a formal elegance Eleanor had only seen in movies. Fine china, crystal glasses, impeccable floral arrangements. It all looked like a theatre scene, and in a way it was. The stage was set for a drama that would change everyone present. Eleanor wore a simple but elegant dress that Beatrice had insisted she buy. She looked at herself in the mirror and almost didn't recognize herself. There was determination in her eyes, something she hadn't seen in a long time. She was no longer the broken woman who had arrived there months ago. She was someone who had found strength in a strange house, in an unlikely friendship, in a truth she didn't yet fully know. The guests began to arrive. Cecilia was the first, hugging her mother and Eleanor with genuine warmth. Edward arrived next, punctual and impeccable as always, but Eleanor noticed the tension in his jaw, the faint, dark circles under his eyes. He was under pressure. Roger Finch was the last to arrive, carrying a leather briefcase and that calculated smile Eleanor had learned to despise. He greeted Beatrice with an exaggerated bow and completely ignored Eleanor, as if she were part of the furniture. They sat at the table. The dinner began with forced, trivial conversation. Edward talked about business, Cecilia, about her gallery. Roger made pompous comments about the financial market. Beatrice remained quiet, observing, waiting for the right moment. The first course was served. Eleanor barely touched her food, her stomach churning with nervousness. She felt Roger's eyes on her from time to time, assessing, calculating. It was between the main course and dessert that Beatrice finally spoke. Her voice was firm, cutting through the superficial conversation like a blade. "I have an announcement to make." All eyes turned to her. Edward put down his fork, his face immediately tense. Roger shifted in his chair, his attention sharpened. "I have decided to make some changes to my will," Beatrice continued, her voice calm but filled with authority. Edward exchanged a quick glance with Roger. "Mother, I think this should be discussed in private, with your legal counsel present." "My legal counsel is present." Mr. Sampson drafted the new documents. It was then that Mr. Sampson entered the room carrying a folder. Edward turned pale. Roger maintained his composure, but Eleanor saw his fingers tighten around his glass. "What is going on here?" Edward asked, his voice beginning to rise. "What is going on, Edward, is that I am finally taking control of my own life," Beatrice replied, "and of my own family." Cecilia watched everything in silence, her eyes wide. Beatrice continued. "In recent months, things have happened in this house that have made me question many choices I've made throughout my life. I allowed my fear of conflict to create a distant family. I allowed fortune to define our relationships, and I allowed you, my children, to see this fortune as an entitlement, not a responsibility." "Mother, please," Edward tried to interrupt, but Beatrice held up her hand. "I'm not finished. I recently discovered that a member at this table, someone who should be protecting the family's interests, has been fabricating false evidence against Eleanor. He created fraudulent documents, invented a non-existent criminal past, all with the aim of painting her as a con artist." The silence that followed was deafening. Roger kept his expression neutral, but Eleanor saw the rapid pulse in his neck. "That is a serious accusation, Mrs. Montgomery," he said, his voice controlled. "I hope you have proof." Mr. Sampson opened his folder and began to spread documents on the table. Eleanor recognized some of them, the forgeries Isabel had discovered. Edward looked at the papers, and then at Roger, comprehension slowly dawning on his face. "You did this?" Edward asked, his voice low but filled with restrained anger. Roger took a deep breath. "I did what was necessary to protect this family's interests. This woman appeared out of nowhere, gained Mrs. Montgomery's trust at a moment of vulnerability. Someone had to act." "Act by creating lies?" Cecilia intervened, horrified. "By destroying an innocent person's reputation?" "Innocent?" Roger let out a humorless laugh. "No one is innocent when money is involved. She knew exactly what she was doing." Eleanor felt her anger rise, but Beatrice spoke before she could. "What she was doing was taking care of a lonely old woman, something my own children hadn't done in years." Edward lowered his head. Cecilia swallowed hard. "I hired Dr. Finch believing he would protect our interests," Edward finally said. "I did not authorize fraud. I did not authorize the destruction of anyone's life." "But you suspected, didn't you?" Beatrice looked at her son with deep sadness. "You were so desperate to secure your inheritance that you didn't question the methods." Edward turned red. "It's not about the inheritance, Mother. It's about protection. It's about money, Edward. It always has been. Cecilia told me about your debts. I know your company is failing. I know you were counting on my inheritance to save yourself." The words fell like bombs on the table. Edward looked at his sister, betrayed. Cecilia looked away. "I wanted to tell you, Mother," he said, his voice breaking, "but I was ashamed. I failed at everything." For the first time that night, Beatrice softened. "Failing is not the problem, Edward. The problem is what you chose to do afterward. You could have come to me, asked for help, talked. Instead, you chose the path of dishonesty." Eleanor watched it all with a heavy heart. She saw a broken man before her, someone who had made terrible choices but was clearly suffering the consequences. It was Roger who broke the moment. "With all due respect, Mrs. Montgomery, I think you're being too hard on your son. He was merely trying to protect what is rightfully his." Beatrice turned to him, her eyes blazing. "And you, Dr. Finch, were merely trying to profit from a family's vulnerability. We investigated your past. We know about the other cases. You specialize in manipulation, in creating Chaos to justify your exorbitant fees. Roger stood up abruptly. I'm not going to sit here and listen to this. Then go, Beatrice said calmly. But know that I am filing a formal complaint with the Bar Association, and that all the fraudulent documents you created will be used as evidence. Your career is over, Dr. Finch. Roger looked at Edward, expecting support, but the man said nothing. He picked up his briefcase and left the room, his footsteps echoing in the hall until the front door slammed shut. The silence that followed was heavy. Edward still had his head bowed. Cecilia had tears in her eyes. Eleanor didn't know where to look. Beatrice finally continued, her voice softer now. Eleanor will stay in this house, and yes, I will include her in my will. Not because she asked, but because she gave me back something I lost a long time ago, the will to live. Edward looked at Eleanor for the first time that night, with something other than suspicion. There was weariness there, and perhaps, just perhaps, a silent apology. I will help you with the debts, Beatrice told her son, but on my terms. You will rebuild your life with honesty, with transparency. No shortcuts, no manipulations. Edward nodded, unable to speak. And you, Cecilia, Beatrice turned to her daughter, stop being afraid to live. Stop hiding in your gallery, in your children who live far away. You have a right to be happy. Cecilia wiped her tears. I'm trying, Mother. Try harder. Beatrice then looked at Eleanor. And you, my dear, you brought light into this house. But there is something I need to tell you. Something I discovered recently that will change everything. Eleanor's heart raced. What? Beatrice took a deep breath. Mr. Sampson, please. The lawyer pulled more documents from his folder. Eleanor, a few months ago when you arrived here, something bothered me. There was a familiarity about you, something I couldn't place. So I started investigating, not to harm you, but because I needed to understand. Eleanor was trembling. What did you discover? I had an older daughter, Laura. She fell in love with a man my late husband and I did not approve of. We were arrogant. We thought we knew best. When she insisted on marrying him, we cut her off from the family. It was the greatest cowardice of my life. Cecilia held her mother's hand. Mother, you don't have to do this now. Yes, I do. Beatrice looked into Eleanor's eyes. Laura left, got married, had a daughter, and then she disappeared. I tried to find her for years, but it was as if she had vanished from the face of the earth, until I discovered that she had passed away a long time ago in an accident. Eleanor felt tears begin to fall. I don't understand. Her daughter, Laura's daughter, was adopted by a family. The records were sealed, but with the help of Mr. Sampson and a very competent journalist, we were able to trace her. It was then that Isabel entered the room. Eleanor hadn't known she would be there. The journalist walked to the table and placed a folder in front of Eleanor. Open it, she said softly. With trembling hands, Eleanor opened the folder. Inside were birth certificates, old photos, adoption papers. And there, on top of everything, was a photo of a young woman holding a baby. The woman had the same eyes as Eleanor, the same smile. That's Laura, Beatrice said, her voice choked with emotion. Your biological mother. And that baby is you. Eleanor couldn't breathe. She looked at the documents, the dates, the names. It all fit. The dates matched. The name of the adoptive mother she had known was the same on the adoption papers. You are my granddaughter, Eleanor, Beatrice said, tears now streaming down her face. That meeting was no accident. It was fate trying to bring us together. Eleanor looked at Beatrice, then at the documents, then back at Beatrice. The room seemed to spin. Edward and Cecilia stared, dumbfounded. Isabel had a faint smile at the corner of her lips. I didn't, Eleanor began, but the words failed her. Beatrice stood up and walked to her, took her hands. You are my blood. You are the granddaughter I searched for decades. And you were here all along, saving your grandmother's life without even knowing who she was. Eleanor collapsed into tears. Beatrice pulled her into a tight hug, and the two stood there crying, holding each other, as if they feared that if they let go, everything would disappear. Cecilia joined the hug, crying too. Edward remained seated, processing, but his eyes were red. When they finally separated, Eleanor looked at everyone there. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." "We know," Isabel said. "That's why we investigated so thoroughly. We needed to be sure before we told you." Eleanor looked at Edward. He met her gaze, and for the first time she saw acceptance there, maybe even relief. "Welcome to the family," he said, his voice hoarse, for real this time. That night changed everything. The truths revealed, the secrets exposed, the bridges rebuilt. Eleanor was no longer a stranger taken in out of charity. She was part of that family by blood and by choice, and as they remained in that room late into the night, talking, crying, laughing, rebuilding bonds that time and pride had broken, Eleanor finally understood. Sometimes you lose everything to find what truly matters. And sometimes chance is not chance, but the universe conspiring to heal old wounds and create new beginnings. The days following the revelation were ones of intense adjustment. Eleanor woke up every morning still processing the truth that had completely changed her life. She was no longer just a woman who had lost everything and been taken in out of generosity. She was a granddaughter, an heiress, part of a lineage she never knew existed. But more than that, she was loved. And that feeling, after so long feeling disposable, was the most transformative of all. Beatrice seemed to grow younger. There was a light in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a vitality that surprised even her doctors. She spent hours talking with Eleanor about Laura, about the mistakes she had made, about the regret she had carried for decades. And Eleanor listened, absorbing every word, mentally building the image of a mother she had never known, but who now, through Beatrice's memories, began to take shape and meaning. The family needed to heal. Edward, initially resistant, began to open up. One afternoon he asked to speak with Eleanor in private. They sat in the garden, the same garden where months ago Eleanor had tended to the flowers with Beatrice. "I need to apologize," he began, his voice filled with a humility Eleanor never imagined she would see in him. "I was cruel, unfair, paranoid. I let fear and desperation turn me into someone I don't recognize." Eleanor listened, seeing not the arrogant man who had intimidated her, but a broken man trying to rebuild himself. "I don't want your inheritance, Edward," she said softly. "I never did. I just wanted a place where I felt safe." "I know that now," he replied, "and that's why my shame is even greater. You offered only kindness, and I repaid you with suspicion and cruelty." They talked for hours. Edward told her about the pressures he felt, the weight of being the son in a traditional family, the expectations he could never meet. Eleanor shared her own pains, her journey of loss and reconstruction, and there, in that garden bathed in the afternoon sun, they began to build something neither of them expected, a genuine family relationship. Cecilia, for her part, embraced Eleanor with an ease that surprised everyone. "I always had a sister in my heart," she joked. "Now I have a niece. It's almost the same thing." They began to spend time together, visiting the gallery, talking about art, life, lost loves, and deferred dreams. Cecilia, who had always seemed so complete and accomplished, revealed her own insecurities, her own fears. And Eleanor, who thought she had nothing to offer, discovered that just listening, just being present, was a gift in itself. But not everything was reconciliation. Dr. Roger Finch did not accept his downfall gracefully. He tried to threaten, to bargain, to bribe. But Beatrice, with the support of Mr. Sampson and the irrefutable evidence Isabel had gathered, was relentless. The complaint was filed, the lawsuit opened. Other clients of Roger's began to come forward, other victims of his manipulations. The castle of lies he had built over years crumbled in weeks. Edward, as part of his redemption, testified against Roger. He admitted his complicity, took responsibility. It was humiliating, it was painful, but it was necessary, and Eleanor, watching him do it, felt a growing respect for the man she once despised. With the legal situation resolved and the family in the process of healing, Eleanor began to think about the future. She didn't want to simply live off the inheritance. She didn't want to be just the long-lost granddaughter. She wanted purpose. She wanted to make a difference. It was in a conversation with Beatrice that the idea emerged. The family corporation had several divisions, but there was one that was practically abandoned, a social responsibility department that existed only on paper, created years ago for tax benefits, but never truly implemented. "I can take that, over," Eleanor suggested. "I can turn it into something real, something that truly impacts lives." Beatrice smiled. That's exactly what Laura would have done. She always cared more about others than herself. Eleanor dove into the project with a dedication that surprised even herself. She started small, mapping needs, talking to communities, understanding where they could really make a difference. Isabel, who had become not just an ally, but a true friend, helped with research, with contacts, with initial publicity. The first support center opened 3 months later. It wasn't grand, but it was real. It offered meals, skills workshops, psychological support, and job placement assistance. Eleanor was there every day, not as the millionaire heiress observing from afar, but as someone who understood what it was like to be lost, aimless, without hope. The people who came there recognized one of their own in her. There was no judgment, no pity. There was only genuine understanding and a sincere desire to help. It was on one of those days, during a professional reintegration workshop, that Eleanor met Gabriel. He was a volunteer and engineer who dedicated his weekends to teaching technical skills to those in need. Tall, kind eyes, an easy smile. There was a lightness about him that contrasted with the intensity Eleanor carried. They started talking during breaks. Gabriel didn't know who she was, didn't know her story with the Montgomery family. To him, Eleanor was just a dedicated coordinator who really cared, and that was exactly how she wanted to be seen. The conversations evolved into coffee after work. The coffees evolved into dinners, and the dinners evolved into long walks through the streets of New York, talking about everything and nothing, discovering affinities, sharing dreams. Gabriel was different from Thomas. There were no demands, no suffocating expectations. He saw her, truly saw her. He saw her strength, but also her fragility. He saw her scars, but he didn't see them as flaws. He saw them as part of the journey that had made her who she was. When Eleanor finally told him her story, she expected everything to change. But Gabriel just held her hand and said, "It doesn't change anything. You're still the woman I'm falling in love with. The rest is just context." And it was in that moment that Eleanor understood what true love was. It wasn't about grand gestures or eternal promises. It was about a daily choice, about seeing someone completely and still choosing to stay. As Eleanor built her new life, Beatrice watched with a mix of pride and melancholy. She knew something she hadn't yet told anyone. The doctors had been clear her time was running out. The disease she had been fighting for years was winning, maybe months, maybe a year if she was lucky. But Beatrice wasn't afraid. For the first time in a long time, she felt her life had a complete meaning. She had found her granddaughter, seen her children reconcile, witnessed the birth of a project that would change lives. She was ready to rest. She decided to tell Edward and Cecilia first. The conversation was painful, tears were shed, but there was also acceptance. Beatrice didn't want aggressive treatments, didn't want to prolong the inevitable. She just wanted to live her final months with quality, surrounded by those she loved. Telling Eleanor was harder. Beatrice waited for the right moment, a quiet afternoon in the garden. Eleanor listened in silence, tears falling silently. "It's not fair," Eleanor whispered. "We just found each other." Beatrice held her face in her hands. "But we did find each other, my dear, and that's all that matters. I lived a long life, I made mistakes, but in the end I was blessed with the chance to know you." Eleanor hugged her grandmother, and they stood there, holding each other, knowing that time was precious and limited. The following months were of deep emotional intensity. Beatrice participated in everything she could, visited the support center, met Gabriel and approved of him with a warm smile, had dinner with the whole family every week. There was an urgency in her gestures, as if she were trying to live every moment twice. Edward used that time to finally be the son he should have been. He visited daily, talked, listened to the old stories he had never had the patience to hear. Cecilia brought her children back from abroad, and Beatrice met the grandchildren she hadn't seen in so long. Eleanor documented everything. She recorded the stories Beatrice told, took photos, created tangible memories she could keep. Gabriel was always by her side, offering silent support, holding her hand in the most difficult moments. The social project grew, more centers were opened, more lives were touched. Eleanor would tell Beatrice about every person they helped, about every transformation they witnessed, and Beatrice would listen with shining eyes, knowing that her legacy would be this, not the buildings or the money, but the lives her granddaughter was changing. One Sunday morning, 6 months after the revelation, Beatrice didn't wake up with her usual energy. The family was called. They all gathered in her room. She was weak but lucid and looked at each of them with love. To Edward she said, "Be honest, son, always. Honesty hurts less than the weight of lies." To Cecilia she said, "Live, my daughter. Don't wait for permission, don't wait for the right moment, live now." To Eleanor she held her hand with what little strength she had. "You saved me, my dear. You saved me from loneliness, from regret, from emptiness. Keep saving other people. It is your gift." And to Gabriel, who stood discreetly in a corner, "Take care of her, not because she needs it, but because she deserves to be taken care of." Gabriel nodded, his eyes welling up. Beatrice closed her eyes, a soft smile on her lips. "What a beautiful family I have," she murmured. "What a beautiful life I've lived." The afternoon fell softly on the mansion. Beatrice fell asleep, surrounded by love, and when night came, she passed peacefully, knowing she left behind more than riches. She left a healed family, a transformative project, and a granddaughter who would carry her legacy forward. The grief was deep but not destructive. They cried, of course, but they also celebrated. They celebrated her life, the lessons she left, the love she planted even in her final months. The funeral was discreet, just family and close friends. Eleanor read a piece she had written, remembering not just the powerful matriarch, but the vulnerable woman who allowed herself to love a stranger, who allowed herself to make mistakes and redeem herself, who lived her final months with an intensity that many do not live in entire decades. Edward and Cecilia took over the management of most of the family businesses. Eleanor, as Beatrice had wished, received substantial resources directed specifically to the social project. It wasn't just an inheritance, it was an investment in transformation. A year later, the project had expanded to 5 cities. Thousands of people had benefited. Stories of new beginnings were told daily. Eleanor had become unintentionally a reference in social entrepreneurship. She gave interviews, lectures, inspired others to make a difference. But for her, the most important thing remained the individual stories. Each person who arrived lost and left with renewed hope. Each life that crossed hers and left transformed. It was in those faces, in those grateful hugs, in those tears of relief, that Eleanor saw Beatrice's true legacy. Gabriel proposed on an ordinary afternoon, without grandeur, just the two of them on a park bench after an intense day of work. "I don't have a ring. I haven't prepared a speech," he said, "but I know I want to spend the rest of my life building good things with you." Eleanor laughed and cried at the same time. "Yes," she replied, 1,000 times, yes. They married in a simple ceremony, in the house Eleanor now shared with Gabriel, a house much smaller than the mansion but infinitely warmer. Edward and Cecilia were there, Isabel was the maid of honor, and beneficiaries of the project filled the small garden with flowers and gratitude. Eleanor looked around and saw not what she had lost but everything she had found. A family she had chosen to love, a purpose that gave meaning to her days, a partner who saw her and loved her for who she truly was. That night, before sleeping, Eleanor looked at the photo of Beatrice she kept on her nightstand. "Thank you," she whispered, "for finding me, for loving me, for showing me that falls can be beginnings." Today, 3 years after that fateful morning when she lost everything, Eleanor Hayes leads one of the largest social impact projects in the country. She is a reference, an inspiration, living proof that new beginnings are possible at any age, in any circumstance. She doesn't forget where she came from. She doesn't forget the broken woman who walked the streets of New York without direction. She doesn't forget the pain of rejection, the weight of loneliness, the feeling of invisibility. She remembers all of it not with bitterness but with gratitude, because it was right there at rock bottom that she found a strength she didn't know she possessed. And when people come to her, lost, without hope, saying they don't know how to start over, Eleanor holds their hands and says, "I know how it feels, I've been where you are, and I promise you, there is a way back. Sometimes you just need someone to believe in you until you can believe in yourself again." Because that's what Beatrice did for her. She believed when Eleanor couldn't believe in herself. She saw value where Eleanor only saw wreckage. She offered love where Eleanor only expected indifference. And now Eleanor does the same for hundreds, thousands of people. Because she understood that true wealth is not in bank accounts or properties. It is in the ability to touch lives, to offer hope, to be a light on the path of those still in darkness. By saving a stranger on that rainy New York night, Eleanor had no idea she was saving herself. She didn't know she was finding a grandmother, a family, a purpose. She didn't know that that seemingly small act of kindness would trigger a transformation that would change not only her life, but the lives of countless others. And perhaps that is what the universe teaches us, that our greatest falls can be preludes to our greatest flights, that our most painful losses can make room for unimaginable gains, that when we feel most lost, we are perhaps just one step away from truly finding ourselves. Eleanor learned that family is not just blood, it is choice, it is presence, it is love in action. She learned that wealth without purpose is empty, but that purpose lived with passion is the greatest fortune one can have. She learned that true love doesn't complete anyone, because complete people don't need completing. They complement each other, building together something greater than the sum of their parts. And most importantly, she learned that it is never too late to start over, that as long as there is life, there is possibility, that every dawn brings with it the chance to write a new page, to make different choices, to be who we always wanted to be, but never had the courage to try. Today, when Eleanor wakes up next to Gabriel, walks to the window, and looks at the city that witnessed her fall and her resurrection, she smiles. She smiles because she is alive, because she is loving and being loved, because she is making a difference, because she transformed pain into purpose, loss into gain, loneliness into community. And she knows that Beatrice, wherever she is proud. Proud of the granddaughter she found, of the woman she became, of the legacy she is building. A legacy not measured in zeros in a bank account, but in transformed lives, in recovered smiles, in renewed hope. Because in the end, we all just want this, to be seen, to be loved, to have purpose. And Eleanor discovered that the best way to have all of this is to offer it generously to others. That by lighting someone else's path, we also light our own. That by saving other people, we save ourselves. And so, from fall to fall, from encounter to encounter, from choice to choice, Eleanor wrote a story that began with pain but ended with love. A story of losses that turned into gains. A story of a woman who lost everything only to discover that what truly matters cannot be taken away, because it is built in the heart. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Eleanor and Beatrice has touched your hearts. If you were moved by this journey of new beginnings, of losses transformed into gains, and of the power of true love, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what stood out to you most in this story. Every day we bring intense narratives like this one, revealing the deepest side of the human soul, stories of overcoming that remind us it's never too late to start over. We'll see you in the next episode, because every story we share here is a reminder that no matter how difficult the present may be, there is always hope on the horizon. See you soon.